This is episode 1 of season 2 of Papercut for October 20th, 2021. Welcome to episode 11 of Papercut, the Nyack Library's podcast. I'm Georgia Grandstaff.
I'm Rosemary Farrell.
And I'm Tracy Dunstan. And this episode, we're going to have a little clip of The Legend of Sleepy Hollow from Jonathan Kruk. He has an MA in educational theater. He's enjoyed full-time career as a professional storyteller since 1989, and he's performed annually at over 200 venues. Currently, he's a BOCES listed art educator offering virtual programs and workshops, and he was selected Best Storyteller in the Hudson Valley and has been featured on The Today Show, Good Morning America, CBS Sunday Morning, the BBC, and other organizations. He's the author of Legends and Lore of Sleepy Hollow in the Hudson Valley. He shares secrets and stories about the Washington Irving and the Headless Horseman at book talks. He's earned 2 awards for his recording of Irving's original The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, and he has 7 other award-winning recordings for children and adults. I saw him perform at Historic Hudson Valley across the river in Tarrytown, and he was amazing. So we reached out to him, and he offered to do a recording of the story. He performs at the Historic Hudson Valley, which is the home of Washington Irving, who's the author of The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. You can find out more about his attending one of his performances at hudsonvalley.org, and it runs from October 1st through the 31st. Advanced registration is required. I also recommend doing a ghost tour of the Old Dutch Cemetery, which is mentioned in the story. That's also a really good tour to go on.
Cool. And I assume they're doing the tours this year with a pandemic because they can be outside probably
it's
the time.
Space. Yeah.
Okay, cool. I'd like to do that. I've only been to that, what is that great pumpkin exhibit? I forget.
The Pumpkin Blaze.
Yeah, Pumpkin Blaze. That's not in Sleepy Hollow. I think it's a little north of Sleepy Hollow.
No, same place, same company.
Oh, it's in Sleepy Hollow. Okay. Organization. Yeah, I went there a few years ago with my sister. She's very into Halloween. So it's her favorite holiday. And it was really cool. It was super cool. It was much more impressive and sort of insane than I expected, what they managed to do. So I recommend that too, if anyone, especially with kids.
It's really fun. And then one time they did at the same place, but they have multiple sites. So they did I think they had him speak, and then they also had a live production, but it was outside and you got to move around the different sites. And it was so cool. It had historic colonial food and music and actors and whatnot. It was amazing.
That sounds great. I love stuff.
I want to go to that.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I saw that. I guess maybe because of the pandemic, they don't have it this year. But I went I think that October probably of 2019. And it was really good.
Well, hopefully, eventually it'll reappear. Should I do the book summary now?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll start with a quick summary of The Legend of Sleepy Hollow itself. It's a Gothic story by American author Washington Irving, contained in his collection of 34 essays and short stories titled The Sketchbook of Geoffrey Crayon Gent, which is a great title, written while Irving was living abroad in Birmingham, England. The Legend of Sleepy Hollow was first published in 1819. Along with Irving's companion piece, Rip Van Winkle, The Legend of Sleepy Hollow is among the earliest examples of American fiction with enduring popularity, especially during Halloween, because of a character known as the Headless Horseman, was believed to be a Hessian soldier who was decapitated by a cannonball in battle. And I think it was the Battle of White Plains, because he mentioned in the story in particular. The Legend of Sleepy Hollow is set in Sleepy Hollow, New York, which is only 7.5 miles away from Nyack in Westchester.
Welcome back to another season of the Papercut podcast. Last year, we started our ghosts as our scary episode, which was a lot of fun. We wanted to bring back spooky stuff to start season 2, so we're talking about a local story that you'll probably heard about by Washington Irving called The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. We have a clip from Jonathan Kruk, who's a master storyteller.
The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, an abridged version by Jonathan Kruk, adapted from Washington Irving. Along the quiet cove where the Hudson River dances into the Pocantico, there wandered an itinerant schoolmaster from Connecticut. Looking like a scarecrow who had escaped from his post with a pointy snipe of a nose, Ichabod Crane was aptly named. He took on the job of schoolmaster in Sleepy Hollow. Living for a couple of weeks at a time in each of his young scholars' homes, he brought learning and a gazette of gossip into the gloomy community. By day, he used the birch branch to urge tardy loiterers down the flowery path of knowledge. By night, he sought students with good cooks for moms, for he enjoyed the comforts of the cupboard. Above all, Sleepy Hollow is known for its ghost lore, and Ichabod found no story detail too gory to hear. Soon, the schoolmaster fell under 2 spells. First, the drowsy, dreamy air of Sleepy Hollow also enchanted Crane to sense spirits. The whole region abounds with haunted houses, haunted streams, bewitched barns and bridges. There appears in Sleepy Hollow the specter of Major Andre, the Revolutionary War spy, and one hears the moans of a mysterious woman in white wailing before storms sweep across the Tappan Zee. The principal goblin and dominant spirit is that of a headless horseman. A cannonball carried away his head at an unnamed battle for independence, leaving a ghoulish ghost relentlessly seeking for what he lost. The farm wives frightened the schoolmaster with fireside tales of this specter whom they called the Galloping Hessian of Sleepy Hollow. The other spell beguiling Ichabod more than any ghost, goblin, or coven of witches, 'twas that of a coquettish woman. Katrina Van Tassel was a ripe, blooming lass, known not only for her beauty, but for the bounty anyone marrying her would inherit. She was the only daughter of Baltus Van Tassel, the most prosperous farmer in the hollow. Ichabod courted Katrina as her singing master. He rolled his eyes over all the Van Tassels' abundant wheat fields and fruit orchards, imagining, one day this will all be mine. The course, of course, to true love, as the bard said, is never straight. Ichabod's route to Katrina was more crooked than a barrel of eels. Standing between Crane and Katrina was a burly, roaring, roistering blade known as Brom Bones. A Herculean figure, he rode like a Cossack through the hollow and presented a ready rival to the scarecrow of a schoolmaster. Brom, though made more of mischief than malice, threatened to double up the schoolmaster and lay him on a shelf. A clever Crane never agreed to meet his challenger on the open field for a round of fisticuffs. Heavens, no. This forced Brawny Bones to turn to a charivari of tricks. He tried smoking Crane out of his school, set a witch web of booby traps. He trained a ridiculous dog to howl whenever Ichabod gave the Van Tassel heiress her singing lesson. Crane would not give up his suit for Katrina. Finally, things come to a head lest they'd go on this way for too long. The Van Tassels held an annual autumnal quilting frolic. Upon receiving the invitation, Ichabod cried, "School's dismissed!" Hair queued in an eelskin, neck stock and knee breeches, he got himself all gimmed up and borrowed for his nightly courting a sway-backed ornery plow horse named Gunpowder. Crane, with a love poem in his frock coat pocket, rode off to woo and win Katrina right after the ball. Again, passing by the Van Tassel farmstead, Ichabod imagined everything, complete with cooked ducks swimming to him in their own gravy, as all mine. The Sleepy Hollow folk, decked out in brass buttons and ribbons, sat down together for the feast. Ichabod, though exceedingly lank, had the dilating powers of an anaconda. He ate with the joy other men felt for a good smoke or a strong drink. When the ancient fiddler struck bow, the schoolmaster bounced onto the dance floor. Every part of his lanky frame moving, he jittered and figured like St. Vitus, the patron of the dance. Why this jumping with joy? Why, his partner was the desired Katrina Van Tassel. The entire party watched and clapped and urged on Ichabod, while the great Brom Bones sulked. He was one of those men who believed dancing unmanly. When the tune ended, Brom set his plan to work. He flattered and cajoled the veterans into polishing up their old Revolutionary War stories. Tales of sword and cannon inevitably led to stories of Sleepy Hollow's spirits. Talk turned to Farmer Brower. Right after he claimed, "I'm a heretical disbeliever in ghosts," the galloping Hessian bashed his brains. Brom followed with a frightful tale of his remarkable race with the Headless Horseman. Ichabod gasped when learning, "The goblin rider vanished in a flash of fire. He cannot cross the bridge by the old Dutch church graveyard." "Goede Nacht all, good night all." Baltus Van Tassel broke up the revelry, and all merrily rode home. Ichabod approached Katrina like Romeo, but soon returned to gunpowder, crestfallen. The coquette had led him on, only to send him away. The night along the Hudson looked as lonely as the rejected Master Crane. The forlorn schoolmaster felt the crickets and owls turn into spooks and spirits. Riding in fits and starts on the cantankerous horse, soon every blazed branch and forest creaking became an uncouth ghoul or the White Lady's ghost. Near the haunts of Wily Swamp, Andre's capture tree spooked Ichabod. Then he heard the plashy tramp of another traveler. "Who are you? Who are you?" he stammered, but received no reply. On mounting a rising ground, which brought the figure of his fellow traveler in relief against the sky, gigantic in height and muffled in a cloak, Ichabod was horror-struck on perceiving that he was headless. But his horror increased on observing that the head rested on the pommel of his saddle. A race against terror took off. "If I can just make it to the bridge," thought the schoolmaster, "the Headless Horseman cannot cross." Ichabod squeezed gunpowder so hard he broke off the saddle and almost popped out the horse's one good eye. Ha-ha! Ichabod reached the church bridge first. He turned to assure himself of the galloping Hessian's fiery disappearance, and alas, he caught the goblin in the very act of hurling his ghastly head. Shh! Whack! A shattering encounter with Crane's cranium ended the night's haunting. The next morning, Hans von Ripper, Gunpowder's owner, found his horse grazing, but wondered, "Where is that scarecrow of a schoolmaster?" No school, yay, no schoolmaster, we've got no school. The school children had a holiday. The Dutch folk, however, made a startling find beneath the bridge. There, scattered on the banks of the Pacantico, they spied the remains of their poor pedagogue. There was a hat, a piece of poetry scribed, "To Katrina," and some cried, "Looky, 'tis Crane's brains." A few scoffed, "'Tis but pumpkin mash." No matter, Ichabod never again was seen in Sleepy Hollow. Now some claimed Crane had gone to the city and suffered a fate worse than being chased by a headless ghost. He had become a lawyer. Brom, of course, married Katrina, and always gave a knowing laugh whenever someone mentioned the pumpkin part of this tale. The wise Dutch farm wives, who know these matters best, insist. The galloping Hessian spirited Ichabod to his grave that night, and in the cove where his old schoolhouse once stood, not far from where the Headless Horseman lies, still hear the ghostly singing of Ichabod Crane.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you, Jonathan. I don't mind starting. So first of all, I read this story when I was a child, I would say, or maybe it was read to me. I don't know. So it was really fun to reread it now as an adult, I guess, as it always is with anything that you read as a kid. I had the really old version from the library. I think, Rosemary, we figured out that it was from, oh, I see right now. Okay, ready? In the beginning of this book, it was a gift of, it's hard to read because it's in script. So the version that I'm reading, somebody gifted the library in 1964. So that's how long we've had this book. And you can tell we've had it this long because the pages are yellowed and very dog-eared and there's some pencil in it. But I read the illustrated version, which was really cool. And I really liked it. It's not very long. The story that Jonathan read was also, that's the abridged version, right? So it doesn't have everything, but I really, just overall, I liked it. I liked reading it. I don't know if I'd say it's quite a scary story, though. I don't know. Did you think it was a scary story? I didn't.
I honestly wasn't that scared. I love ghost stories, but I think because like you, I think I read this when I was a kid, but I don't think I read Washington Irving's version of it. I probably, had a picture book or saw a little cartoon of it on TV. It's one of those stories, like a lot of legends, that you feel like you've read the original, even though, because you just know the story, you grew up knowing the story. And then when you actually sit down and look at the text, you're like, oh, this is not what I expected. I think there's so much humor in it. I think that tempers the scary part at the end, because Irving's characterization of especially Ichabod is just really funny and ironic, and he's sort of like poking fun at him the whole time for his pretensions and the way he dresses and his obsession with all the food that he can eat if he marries this particular young woman. I forget her name. The Katrina Van Tassel, which is another great name, because her father is one of the wealthy landowners in that area. And of course, Ichabod gets pushed to the side by the younger guy, Brom Bones. Was that his name? Brom Bones, which is all the names are awesome. So yeah, the humor in it tempered the scary bit, and you also get a sense that it was a giant practical joke played on Ichabod. And I guess what I remember as a kid is they emphasize the more frightening aspects of the story, and the films certainly do, which we can talk about a little later. But I enjoyed reading it. It was really entertaining. And Georgia and I were looking up some of the words that popped up in it that we didn't recognize, like sort of archaic language that's used. But some of these words were just fantastic. Like I would love to slip them into everyday speech if I could, because
we'll sound really smart.
Yeah. People will just feel like, you pretentious. Get out of here. But we also found out that Ichabod Crane was there was an Ichabod Crane, like a real person named Ichabod Crane, right, Georgia? Didn't you?
Yeah, he was a general or something. I think when I read about it, it seems like he names all of his characters from people he's met in real life. Mm-hmm. I think that he asks them for permission to use their names. So I think a lot of the characters, like the girl, Katrina Van Tassel, was a real person. I don't think that anybody is actually like the character that he creates, but the names are real. And it was funny because when I was reading, I loved the description of Brom Bones, and I kept thinking, that I was imagining him as Gaston from Beauty and the Beast. That to me was the exact character that he was, a big, brooding man with his horse, and that I loved it. I loved the description of the characters. It was funny. It was hilarious, honestly.
Yeah, everyone was really everyone was very vivid. And I can understand wanting to use the name Ichabod Crane again. If you met someone with that name, you're like, oh, this is too perfect. It's like something out of Dickens. That's what reminds me of Dickens' characters' names are so evocative and really are stand-ins for their personalities. And I just like reading legends in general because I love the combination of fiction and history and all the place names, especially being that it's across the river, and I've been to Sleepy Hollow and Tarrytown and the places that he talks about. So it's always fun to read entertaining stories that sort of teach you about the area that you live in, I think. And it's especially good if you're, reading this to younger kids and give them a sense of the place and where they're from. And also just like the fact that it's such an American story, even though I went online and I was doing some research because like every legend, like the Headless Horseman concept or specter, is appeared back in the Middle Ages, and you could see it in all sorts of different cultures as, the past that's always trying to catch up with you, that won't leave you alone, or the sense of regret, or a revenge figure that's always pursuing humans through the ages, and to see as it morphs and changes depending on the culture that takes the story and it makes it its own. So it's constantly up for reinterpretation, which is also fun.
Except for that movie was awful.
So we were talking about you talk about the Tim Burton movie with Johnny Depp.
Yeah.
I've honestly didn't see it because I heard it was so bad, even though I've loved some of Tim Burton's work, but he's made some real clunkers, and that's supposed to be one of them.
Why is it so bad, Tracy? I want to know.
It's just so weird. It's been a while. I saw it, I think it came out maybe in the 90s, maybe?
Yeah, we looked it up. It was like 1999.
Yeah.
That the movie was released, yeah.
So I saw it then, and I haven't seen it again, but I don't think it's one of those things where they loosely base it on, it's kind of like the TV show Sleepy Hollow 2, where it's barely the story and it's just like super weird, and Johnny Depp's kind of overacting, and just didn't like it.
Does he play Ichabod?
Yeah.
I assume?
And
then I think Christina Ricci is Katerina. Or Katrina, whatever her name is. But
interesting. Yeah, it's funny to read it because talking about the history thing, I really forget that this area was settled by Dutch people. So it seems like he was making fun of them though, the whole book. I don't know if that's just the nature of telling this type of story, sort of like a mythology story, and so you really exaggerate all the characters, but everybody seemed to be pretty like he was laughing at them.
Yeah, there's definitely a tongue-in-cheek, and I could see how it would. I'm looking forward to. But I wish we had a video of the storyteller doing this. Not that would work for a podcast, but I would love to see him do it live, because that, to me, I'm very enthralled by people who can tell a good story in front of other people, because I always get so nervous, and to act it out, especially the one man or one person or one woman shows that I've seen, just always blow me away. But I also was surprised to see that there was a TV show called Sleepy Hollow, because I was seeing what was in the catalog. And of course it was on Fox in 2013 to 2017. It's like a classic Fox TV show.
yeah.
And I was reading the synopsis and said, it's crazy. It's like reincarnation of Ichabod Crane comes to the modern day world to solve a centuries old murder mystery with the FBI. It's like part of me wants to try to watch some, just because I'm sure it's totally outlandish and ridiculous. So.
I saw the pilot and I was like, forget this. And it looks nothing like Sleepy Hollow too. So it's just
yeah, and it was supposed to take place in Sleepy Hollow, but from what they obviously didn't film it there, they turned it into this whole other other
Like-
type of town, type of village. It's much bigger, right?
Yeah, it looks like
It's
DC almost kind of. I think at one point
Yeah.
they end up in DC.
Yeah, maybe they figured maybe they were filming in DC the whole time, and then finally were like, you know what, we got to just move the story into DC. Yeah, I'm surprised it lasted for 4 seasons too. That's impressive. Yeah. But yeah, and I noticed there was, I mean, besides the Tim Burton and the TV series, there's a bunch of versions, like filmed versions that are geared more toward younger kids that probably emphasize this, the ghost story more than anything else. That I've probably seen 1 or 2 in my life just by watching too much TV as a child, and lots of picture book versions of it. I mean, I found I read it out of a book that we have on the shelf called Stories of the Hudson by Washington Irving. So it's a collection, but it's pretty cool because it's all the stories are obviously set in this area. So
Well, maybe it's because I grew up on the other side of the river, but my schools were always obsessed with Washington Irving and this story. So I read it a couple times. I actually really like Rip Van Winkle better because I think that one's really funny. But I thought it kind of dragged a little bit in the middle. So, but it's still good. But yeah, I even bought a copy of it because I always really liked Washington Irving. I think his writing style is kind of fun, and I like the same with you. I like the legend and history stuff of it.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, they took us on a field trip down there, I think in 5th grade. And I think basically every Halloween we read the story in elementary school.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I grew up not too far from here, but in New Jersey, so we weren't as obsessed. I don't think I even realized that Sleepy Hollow was a real place until I was older and actually was up in this area. But I know that the town of Sleepy Hollow obviously goes crazy every Halloween with all the events and decorations and
I think maybe 5 years ago or 10 years ago, they actually changed their name to Sleepy Hollow because it used to be just Tarrytown. And then I can't remember what year it was, but I remember there was a big deal. They were like, oh, let's just change it to Sleepy Hollow.
Oh, so the Tarrytown that was all Tarrytown, and then they split off basically and became Sleepy Hollow?
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, that's intense. I guess if it's a good way to get people to come visit your town, why not? Because people from all over the world would recognize it and would probably be really jazzed to realize it's an actual place. Yeah, because the story starts off, he talks about Tarrytown and the origins of the name of Tarrytown, and
which I love.
Yeah, I love that kind of stuff.
The men would hang out at the pubs.
Yeah, tarrying behind when they were supposed to be busy.
Yeah, because
I love that kind of stuff too.
Because did you know that Mike's from there? So he was explaining that meaning to me because I didn't know either. That's why it was called Tarrytown. But yeah,
I never. It didn't even occur to me that would be the reason it was called that. And it's also interesting to see them talk about the Tappan Zee, which is obviously what the old bridge was called, but that whole chunk of the river is the Tappan Zee, and that's where the bridge got its name. So all the people who are freaking out about the bridge changing its name, it's still the Tappan Zee, really. That's what I think.
Yeah, I loved all the descriptions and everything. You forget, or I forget sometimes, that we live in such a beautiful area.
Mm-hmm.
So it was kind of nice to read about that. But in general, I feel like when I was reading this, I was reading it with a very cynical eye, because you read something and you wonder what the author's, like what his intentions were. I don't know. So, obviously there are things that are just outdated, like their description of people of, can I say this? When he says that the Negro comes to the schoolhouse or something, and isn't that how he describes it?
Yes.
So, yeah. So things like that are just very obviously not of this time. But I found myself looking some stuff up. He kept referencing the history of New England witchcraft, the Cotton Mather's book, which I know I had learned about, way back in the day in high school, but I completely forgot about it. So I had to look it up again. And it just had me wondering why did he have Ichabod Crane? Like it was like the one book he owned, and they kept referencing it like throughout the story. So I don't know why.
It's true. Yeah.
I guess maybe to show that Ichabod Crane was, for all his being the teacher and thinking of himself as a comparatively learned man, he was still susceptible to superstitions and getting scared and believing these fantastical stories. And he also talks a lot about, in the beginning when he's setting up the story, how there's like a sense of like mysticism and magic just in the air of that place. Like the fact that it's called Sleepy Hollow, it's sort of, when you're living there, when you stay there for any length of time, you sort of get caught up in this world of the supernatural and almost forget about the rest of the world. Like it casts a spell on you. So he sets that up.
He does a really good job of setting up the setting.
Yes, yeah, totally. But Georgia, you brought up an interesting point with like the anachronisms, or the things that you obviously, scenes that wouldn't fly these days, for good reason. Like there's the scene where he calls the Negro comes to tell him about the party, but then there's also, to me, more disturbing was, I guess, when he's describing being at the party and all the again, Negroes are outside watching through the windows, and the way he describes them is so completely offensive, but is of that time. I mean, it could be, actually, I was thinking I was afraid it was going to get even worse. Like he was going to go off on a tangent, but like that kind of writing, you could not, I'm sure that's not something that's in more modern adaptations of the book at all. It's just part of that, the original story.
Are you looking it up now, Tracy?
Yeah, I'm kind of curious if it's in this book. I don't remember that when I reread it.
Oh, really? I know exactly where it is in my book because of the illustrations, and there's an illustration of the man that comes to the schoolhouse, and I think they sort of imply that he works for the Van Tassels, I think, when he comes to invite him to the party.
Do you know what, oh, never mind, it's about chapters.
There's no page numbers on mine, but I could find it and show it to you. Oh, here we go. Can you see it, Tracy?
Oh, wow, yeah,
that's
offensive.
the guy that comes to the schoolhouse. Yeah, I mean, things like that are just, and then in general, the descriptions of women. But then there was this line at the end, and I wrote it down because I loved it. No matter, I loved it. Sorry for all my ums and ahs. Anyway, he was talking about, I don't know her name, but Katrina Van Tassel's mother, and they're talking about her, and she's preparing for the party. And there's this line where she says, like, she doesn't look after her daughter too much. Ducks and geese are foolish things and must be looked after, but girls can take care of themselves. I love that. So then I thought, okay, maybe Washington Irving isn't so bad.
So
bad. He has some modern views of women, maybe.
That's a good line. I like that.
Yeah. Oh, I love that line. I had to write it down.
It's gonna bug me.
Yeah, I'm trying to find the scene I just described, and I'm of course not able to.
Oh, when they're at the party.
Yes, I think it's at the party when everyone is inside the farmhouse, and he describes African American people outside looking in, and just the way he describes their physical features is like, ugh. It's like a cartoon version, like the old cartoons.
Yeah. I don't have page numbers, but the paragraph starts, Ichabod prided himself upon his dancing. Yeah, so they all go to dance basically, and that's when.
Oh, yep, there we go. I found it. Yeah.
Oh, that's where it starts. Let me see.
That's the paragraph with the description I'm talking about. It's just short, a few sentences.
Oh, yeah, here it is.
Yep.
And this is just, how old is this? I got this in 2017.
Yeah, that's just part of the story, and this is something that we deal with now, going back and rereading these things. Another thing I noticed was, and I noticed it because I was looking up a lot of the words that he used, or just a lot of the references, like he references the John Milton poem. I'm going to mispronounce this, but Allegro. And I was looking at it, and I realized that he he sort of seems obsessed with referencing like Greek and Roman times, or they, maybe just at that time, like that was what they sort of romanticized, that whole thing. Yeah, I feel like we don't see that so much anymore. We don't.
When did he write this? What did we say?
What year exactly?
1819. Yeah, so they were the early Federalist period. They were romanticizing the Greeks and Romans back in that time period.
Yeah. So I do love that stuff. I do the history stuff. It was fun to go back and reread this and look it through. I wish it were a little scarier. Yeah. I tried really hard. I tried to really put myself in the mindset, especially when I got to the part where he starts to encounter, the Headless Horseman, and which he doesn't actually, is that phrase even used in the book, the Headless Horseman? Probably, right?
I think so.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I really tried to like close my eyes sort of and think about all the sounds that he was describing and everything, and it just, but then when I was listening to Jonathan's telling of it, he does a really good job of doing that. Yeah.
Says I'm glad. I think this was a really fun. I'm glad that I reread it, and this is a really good idea for an October podcast.
It's making me want to get into the spooky season now.
Yeah.
I normally do not really participate in anything to do with Halloween, but now I'm kind of romanticizing it in my head, and I really want to go over there, and I really want to listen to spooky stories, and I want to go watch the really bad Johnny Depp film now.
Yeah, I really want to read like a really scary ghost story right now.
Yeah, something very scary. I mean, I think in another episode we talked about books that frightened us, and I still haven't revisited my like dreaded Alfred Hitchcock short story collections from a child, because that used to just absolutely terrify me, and the recording, the record album of different actors reading it, that was just did me in. Certain things you're like, do I really want to poke that snake with the stick? But yeah, I'd be in the mood to watch some good. And I don't like slasher movies. I like really like supernatural or psychological horror movies. Those to me are much more terrifying than blood and gore, which there isn't any of that in this book either, which is sort of nice.
No, I kind of wanted that. I wanted more.
You didn't want a pumpkin head at the end smashed on the ground?
No, I didn't. I did not.
And a missing body, a missing Ichabod.
I mean, we're meant to understand that he just ran away, right?
I think so.
I guess so, because that embarrassment for being turned down after all his plans for his future wife to be that did not pan out.
I kind of want you guys to watch that movie, and I'm curious what you think.
The Johnny Depp one? Maybe I'll watch it this weekend. I'll make some popcorn.
Yeah, I'll report back. We'll let you know.
Yeah.
Sounds good. For our next segment, we were lucky to be able to interview Christina Orban-La Salle. She's the Director of Visitor Services at Sleepy Hollow Cemetery at 540 North Broadway in Sleepy Hollow. Sleepy Hollow Cemetery is the final resting place of numerous famous figures, including Washington Irving, whose 1820 short story, The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, is set in the adjacent burying ground at the Old Dutch Church of Sleepy Hollow. Incorporated in 1849 as Tarrytown Cemetery, the site posthumously honored Irving's request that it change its name to the Sleepy Hollow Cemetery. It was listed in the National Register of Historic Places in 2009. So our first question is, the question in everyone's mind is the cemetery haunted? Have you had any eerie happenings that you've witnessed?
I have witnessed plenty of eerie happenings, and they all can be traced back to very human origins, unfortunately. So no, I would say I don't feel that this cemetery is haunted. Generally, when you think of things being haunted, it's because something bad happened to these people, and that's why they're coming back. So we are most definitely not haunted. We are a beautiful historic cemetery. And there are definitely weird things that happen, though, especially in October, because we get a lot of, I would say a lot of people come to visit, and some of them are definitely out there.
Oh, I bet. It's probably like the whole crew of people that also go visit Roswell and things like that. And I'm not making fun of people. I'm just saying that, that's like the nature of the game, I guess.
Definitely, definitely.
The Legend of Sleepy Hollow has characters that are named after real people, even if the real people are not like their characters, and are there families of the people involved in the cemetery in any way?
Yeah, so Washington Irving, like most artists, took a little bit of this person, a little bit of that person, and came up with something that was wholly of his own creation. So he knew these people locally, and he may have borrowed the name of Katrina Van Tassel to turn it into Katrina Van Tassel of the story, but he based the personality of the Katrina in the short story on the real Katrina's Aunt Eleanor. So, he made composite figures. Now, many of these inspirations, I would say, for Irving are actually buried in our neighbor's churchyard. So a lot of people, when they come to Sleepy Hollow Cemetery, make the assumption that it's one great big cemetery, but it's not. You actually are seeing two cemeteries when you come to visit, because near our south gate, you have the Old Dutch Church and its burying ground. So everyone buried within that cemetery was a worshiper, a parishioner of the Old Dutch Church. And it is still an active cemetery today, too. Sleepy Hollow Cemetery is a 90-acre cemetery that's non-denominational, so welcoming to all, that grew up around the Old Dutch Church and its churchyard. But for the casual visitor, it does all just look like one big place, and we're very good neighbors. So it's kind of fun when people do learn the distinction between the two. So Washington Irving himself is buried in Sleepy Hollow Cemetery, but many of his inspirations, not all though, are buried in the Old Dutch churchyard.
Is there anyone else interesting that's buried there? Or in either?
Lots of interesting people are buried in Sleepy Hollow Cemetery. It is a wonderful place to visit because it's not just for well-known people, although there are many, but it's also very much a local cemetery. There are a lot of local families, and those families come to visit, some very frequently, some daily, others weekly, monthly, which is a beautiful thing. But we do have a lot of visitors who come to meet some of the other famous people there. Washington Irving is down in the southern end of the grounds, but if you come further to the north, you can visit the graves of people like Andrew Carnegie and Samuel Gompers, the labor leader. So it's quite interesting to see this irony in the afterlife, where you've got Samuel Gompers' grave across the street from Andrew Carnegie, the Titan of steel. So if you go further to the north, you will find the private mausoleum for William Rockefeller and his family members, and some very impressive sculptures and monuments, including the large mausoleum for Leona and Harry Helmsley. So whether you're a car fan coming to look at the mausoleum of Walter Chrysler, or someone who's looking to meet the real Carl Schurz, because many people have been to the park in New York City that's named after him, but they like to come and visit the grave too. There's kind of something for everyone, I would say. We have a lot of industrialists, but many artists, authors, painters, theater directors, you name it. So it makes a fun visit for all. But anyone who is a fan of history generally enjoys a walkabout Sleepy Hollow Cemetery.
You have all the rich people.
Not just though. So we kind of joke that Samuel Gompers is keeping it real for visitors, because to get up the hill to see some of those very famous mausoleums, you have to pass his grave. And so it's kind of a nice reminder of the workers that make that possible.
I was just kidding, but yeah.
Okay, I have a couple of questions. This is Rosemary. The Legend of Sleepy Hollow is a story based around a myth. Do you find that local residents still feel it's important to keep the story alive?
Well, I would say yes, definitely. After all, it was Washington Irving who gave the name of Sleepy Hollow to the area. It wasn't actually renamed Sleepy Hollow until the late 1990s. After the General Motors plant closed, they renamed what was formerly called North Tarrytown to Sleepy Hollow, and the village took a vote on that. To this day, there are some who still are not happy that the name changed, but it does harken back to Irving's short story, which was published in 1819 overseas and 1820 here in the United States. So I think it's important to recognize where the name comes from and what it celebrates. As you say, it is based on a legend, although you'd be surprised to know how many people call and ask how they can meet the Headless Horseman. And it's always fun. You have to remind people that it is just a legend after all. If you actually see a horseman, be assured he's flesh and blood. And the horse is real too. But it's always a good thing, I think, to be reminded of where places and names come from and the meaning behind them. And who wouldn't want to embrace that? I mean, Washington Irving has a tremendous legacy in this whole area and New York as well overall. So hope they never stop celebrating it.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because there's all this controversy, as I'm sure you know, on your side of the river about the renaming of the Tappan Zee Bridge, the new bridge, to the Como Bridge. And it's kind of the same, the same thing. Like, why wouldn't we want to keep, Tappan Zee? Why wouldn't we want to keep that name? It's funny to hear that people were upset about changing the name from North Tarrytown, which to me is boring. Sleepy Hollow is so much better, so much nicer sounding. I mean, plus, because of the historical significance of it. But
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
Yeah, Sleepy Hollow is definitely more evocative. And also at Halloween this time of year, they really go to town. They do it up over there with the decorations and programs and events. So I think it's fun.
It's very fun. It's very fun. And I think one thing that the village does so nicely, and all of the other historical sites and nonprofit organizations like us that, kind of participate in the Halloween season, is that it has a very nice and organic feel to it. So it's not really a huge commercial thing. I mean, if you come on a cemetery tour, it's a historical and educational opportunity. It's also quite fun and entertaining, but it's not, sensationalized or anything like that. You can visit Washington Irving's home, Sunnyside, and really feel the spirit of the author. If you go to the Great Jack-o'-lantern Blaze run by Historic Hudson Valley, you're on a historic site looking at these, magical installations. So I think it has a very nice feel to it and makes it really enjoyable, but not being over the top.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah.
Plus, anything that encourages people to reread The Legend of Sleepy Hollow or maybe explore some of Washington Irving's other works is a great thing. Mm-hmm. I'm sure you all, as being with the library, would agree with that.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, for sure.
And it must be fun if you're a teacher, especially in the elementary schools around this time of year, to be able to bring your kids to different, well, maybe not this year, but bring the kids to different sites and different events so they can get some history with the fun of Halloween, because I love Halloween.
Absolutely. It's the best holiday, isn't it?
Yeah. I love it. So in the cemetery, there's a small wooden bridge. Is it the same one that he mentions in the book?
No, it's not. And It's always interesting when people expect to see the original, because no wooden bridge would last that many centuries. So no, it's not the original. It is, in fact, reinforced so everyone can safely drive across it. But it probably looks very similar to what the original one did look like. Historians have estimated there were several wooden bridges spanning the Pacantico River, which runs through the cemetery grounds and goes underneath Route 9 to connect with the Hudson River that's to the west of us. So who knows which one was the original bridge that Washington Irving wrote about, but it provides a nice scenic backdrop for people to take pictures on with the fall foliage. It's a very popular spot. You can really feel the feeling of the story when you're standing on it. And it even sounds like there are horses' hooves as you drive over it, because the wooden planks kind of are rustling as you go over. So that's very fun.
Sounds safe.
And one last question for me. Have you had any sightings of the Headless Horseman, or claimed sightings of the Headless Horseman?
Well, in October, typically the Headless Horseman does ride. He often makes an appearance in the Old Dutch churchyard, which is very fitting because that is where Irving says the Headless Horseman rises every night to go off in search of his head. But not this year, sadly, and not last year either because of COVID-19, but hopefully he'll make a reappearance next year, because it's always great fun to see.
How old is the cemetery?
Well, the Old Dutch churchyard dates back to the mid 1600s or so. Our cemetery dates back to 1849. And
so that's the oldest grave then, 1849?
Well, that would be the oldest burial that we performed. However, I say it like that because there are some older graves that were sort of later acquired through land parcels that were added. In the Old Dutch churchyard, the oldest stone that you can still read dates to 1755, because nothing lasts forever, not even stone. Over time, it flakes off, or might have been obscured underground over the centuries. So it's a good reminder to make each day count, because nothing lasts forever, and we certainly don't. You know what they say about death and taxes.
Is there any part of the tour that's not normally open to the public, or that's closed off to the public, or just the cemetery in general? Is there anywhere that people aren't allowed to go?
There is one place that we do enjoy taking people into for a glimpse of how things used to happen in the past, and that is the receiving vault, which it's a little grim to think about, but what it received was you, if you happened to die in the depths of winter back when we were first founded and for decades afterwards, because back in the day, all graves were dug by hand, and if you died in the middle of winter when the ground was frozen solid, the shovel wouldn't pierce the frost layer. And so the receiving vault is where you would go into sort of a temporary storage until the spring thaw. So obviously we don't need to use that any longer, but it is kind of an interesting spot, and it has an interesting connection with a movie that was made in 1970 called House of Dark Shadows, which draws many fans to the cemetery, because Dark Shadows was a soap opera in the 1960s that was extremely popular and featured a vampire named Barnabas Collins. And in the movie that was filmed in 1970, a scene from the movie was shot at the receiving vault, because every good vampire needs a crypt to emerge from. So we get a lot of fans that love to see that. And it is quite interesting, and definitely has a spooky feel to it when you go inside.
That's funny, because they made a few years ago, or maybe actually not a few years ago, probably 10 years ago now, they made a remake of Dark Shadows, the movie, with Johnny Depp, I believe, playing him. And then he also is in the Headless Horseman remake, the Tim Burton one that they made.
Exactly. Yes. Gotta love Johnny Depp.
Yeah, I guess he has a particular fascination with certain roles.
And he plays them so well, doesn't he?
Yeah.
It suits him.
So is there anything else about the cemetery that you think we should know?
Well, I would say please come and visit. So the grounds are open for what we call individual visitors, meaning anyone and a couple of friends or their family are welcome to come any day of the year between 8 and 4:30. But please don't come after that, because we do close the gates at 4:30 and there's no access after hours unless you're on one of our walking tours. But the cemetery does a lot more than just walking tours. We do a lot of special events and literary evenings and fun things like that as a way to bring in extra revenue for historical preservation. So we are a nonprofit organization and we are an old cemetery. So you can imagine it does require, a lot of money to keep things looking nice, to restore monuments that might be in need of repair, or clean certain marbles that are showing signs of degradation. So please do check us out, because I know a lot of people don't think about a cemetery and the word fun in the same sentence, but it can be. But it is, of course, primarily a place for the dead. So we do ask anyone that comes to visit, just keep that in mind and enjoy your time with us, but behave as if you had family buried here, whether you do or not.
Yes, we would hope that, right? Because I'm sure that, you have to close at certain times, otherwise teenagers come, or, like things like that, regular cemetery, spooky stuff. Do you think they're going to come battle the Headless Horseman or something like that?
Yes, the Headless Horseman would make a fearsome security guard, wouldn't he?
Oh, yeah. Well, thank you for answering our questions and adding to our podcast. It was really, we had a good time rereading The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, because I think all of us hadn't read it since we were children, if at all. So it was really fun to revisit it and to sort of explore some local history. So thank you for adding to that.
Well, thank you very much for having me. And I can say it's a beautiful thing to celebrate the legend, because one thing that I always like to remind people who haven't read the legend is that this is a short story that has never been out of print in 200 years, which is really an astounding thing when you think about it, because there are things published, a decade or so ago that are already out of print. But Washington Irving's short story has stood the test of time, and it's because it's such a great read. If it weren't it would be long forgotten, but it's not. So thank you for helping to spread the word about how wonderful the story is, and Washington Irving in general. We're huge fans over here of Washington Irving and Sleepy Hollow, and are really glad to see the interest continue, hopefully for at least another 200 years.
Yes, most definitely so. Okay, well, thank you, Christina. Right. Thank you from us.
Next episode is going to be a memoir discussion. We'll have it more fleshed out soon, but
yes.
Memoirs.
And please check out our Twitter, Instagram accounts at Nyack Library. We're at facebook.com/Nyack Library. Our website's nyacklibrary.org. YouTube channel is called Nyack Library from Home, and our general email address is info@nyacklibrary.org. Thanks for listening. I'm Rosemary.
I'm Tracy.
I'm Georgia. Thank you for our recording from Jonathan. I'm not sure if it's pronounced Kirk or Kruk, but thank you. It's really awesome. And thank you for listening to episode 11 of Papercut, aka episode 1 of season 2. It's really fun to do this podcast. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Please continue to listen and tell everybody about it. We're doing our best here. It's a lot of fun to do these podcasts, so I hope you guys like it too.